The elevator doors opened on a rain-bruised afternoon, and the lobby echoed with Eleanor's heartbeat as Maya thrust a phone into her hands. Maya said, "Your estate account is bleeding." Eleanor read the transfer name and felt the floor tilt. Nathan Cole. The kind stranger from the funeral. The man who held her hand by the casket and whispered gentleness like a prayer. Eleanor said, "That's impossible." Maya said, "It's today, and it's real." Through the glass office, Nathan smiled at the receptionist with the calm of a saint. His suit was immaculate. His mask was perfect. Eleanor crossed the marble, each step a drumbeat. She pushed open the door and held up the phone. Nathan watched her like a doctor studying a bruise. Nathan said, "Let's not do this here." Eleanor said, "You took my husband's legacy." The rain clattered like coins on the windows, and even the lights seemed to flinch. Nathan said, "You're in shock, and people make mistakes when they're grieving." Eleanor kept her voice low, because rage loved an audience. She said, "That account was frozen pending probate." Nathan said, "A clerical hold is not the same as a freeze." Maya said, "We have timestamps and IP logs." The word logs made Nathan blink like a camera shutter. He smiled again, softer, more pastoral than predatory. Nathan said, "I arranged emergency disbursements for funeral costs." Eleanor said, "You never had access." He tapped a folder on the table, as if tapping a spell book. Nathan said, "Your late husband authorized consulting help." Eleanor remembered his hand at the graveside, steadying her as dirt struck the lid. She whispered, "You held me so I would not see you reach for the key." The receptionist knocked and slid in a message slip, eyes apologizing for the intrusion, and the room felt suddenly crowded with invisible witnesses. Nathan said, "If you accuse me, we do it with counsel present." Eleanor said, "Call him." Maya said, "Please do." Nathan dialed with ritual care, and Eleanor watched the mask adjust to the audience he expected. Victor answered on speaker, voice smooth as varnish. Victor said, "This is a misunderstanding." Eleanor said, "Then explain the transfers." Victor said, "Authorized consulting for estate transition." Maya said, "The authorization is forged." Silence pressed and thunder stamped its signature on the window. Nathan said, "Let's pause and breathe." Eleanor said, "I finally am." Nathan said, "Grief rewires memory, Eleanor." He slid a photocopy across the table, a signature that wore her husband's surname like a stolen coat. Eleanor felt heat carve through the chill and did not sit back. She said, "He never met you." Nathan said, "We spoke after the diagnosis." Maya said, "Show phone records." Nathan said, "Bound by confidentiality." The words were silk, hiding wire. Eleanor saw the dates and heard the hospice monitor beeping in her mind. Nathan said, "He begged me to shield you from details." Eleanor said, "Shielding means hiding." Nathan said, "Protecting." Thunder climbed the wall and sat between them like a judge. Eleanor said, "You protected my money from me." The building lights flickered, and the storm dimmed them all to silhouettes as if the truth had cut the power. Nathan said, "You need rest, not crusades." Eleanor said, "I need my husband's wishes honored." Maya said, "We file an emergency injunction tonight." Nathan stood, every motion curated for calm, and reached for the folder. Eleanor placed her hand on it first. Eleanor said, "You don't get to carry my life out of this room." Nathan said, "Then let's both leave it." The receptionist hovered, sensing the temperature, and pulled back. Maya said, "I'll call the courthouse clerk." The thunder rolled away, and in its gap the room breathed. Eleanor said, "I won't be gentle again." The funeral home smelled of lilies and rain, and Eleanor's black gloves clutched the order of service like a shield. Nathan appeared then, not as a predator but as a mourner with practiced empathy. Nathan said, "No one should stand alone at a graveside." His voice threaded into her grief like balm. Eleanor said, "He was everything, and now the world feels airless." Nathan said, "I know that suffocation too." His words wrapped around her loneliness, weaving intimacy out of ashes. People nodded at his presence as though he belonged, and Eleanor let herself lean against his steady hand. He steadied her when the casket sank, a silhouette against storm-gray skies. For a moment, Eleanor thought the stranger understood. Maya watched from a distance, suspicion already flickering like a candle's warning flame. Days later, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table with bills scattered like confetti from a cruel parade. Nathan arrived carrying a casserole dish, wrapped in foil. Eleanor said, "You didn't need to do this." Nathan said, "No one eats when grief is fresh." She smiled faintly, weary, but softened by the gesture. Nathan placed the dish carefully, like a ritual offering. Nathan said, "Your husband spoke of you with reverence." Eleanor said, "You spoke with him?" He nodded, weaving threads that bound her tighter to his lie. Maya's call interrupted, her voice sharp. Maya said, "He's too convenient, too present." Eleanor said, "He's kind when the world is empty." Nathan's smile lingered like a seed burrowing deeper. At the town square cafe, Eleanor found Nathan waiting with coffee already ordered. He said, "I remembered you take it black." She frowned, touched by his attention. Eleanor said, "I don't recall telling you that." Nathan said, "I listen between words." His charm disarmed her suspicion. Other patrons glanced with casual approval, assuming companionship where there was manipulation. Maya entered abruptly, sat without invitation, and eyed Nathan's polished cufflinks. Maya said, "What line of work keeps you so free?" Nathan said, "Consulting, flexible hours." Eleanor said, "Maya, not today." Maya sighed but pressed no further, the warning hanging like smoke above the table. Nathan reached across, fingers brushing Eleanor's knuckles, claiming space. In her husband's study, Eleanor traced dust on the spines of law books, grief pressing against her ribs. Nathan stood by the desk, eyes soft with calculated patience. Nathan said, "This room is heavy with memory." Eleanor said, "I can still smell his cologne." Nathan said, "Let me help you organize, piece by piece." She hesitated, yet his steady presence promised order where there was chaos. Maya appeared at the doorway, arms crossed. Maya said, "Be careful what you let others touch." Eleanor said, "He's helping, not hurting." Nathan's gaze lingered on the desk drawer with hunger, disguised as concern. He said, "We'll safeguard what matters." Eleanor believed, because belief dulled the ache. Eleanor lay awake in her darkened bedroom, city lights bleeding through blinds. Her phone buzzed with Nathan's late-night message. "You're not alone in this." She whispered, "Why does that comfort me?" Memories of her husband's laughter played like broken film reels, tangled with Nathan's sudden presence. Maya's voice replayed in her head, warnings sharp as glass. Eleanor texted back, "Thank you for caring." Nathan replied instantly, "Always." She felt the rope tighten, spun from kindness and deception. Her eyes closed on the illusion of safety, unaware of the hands building a trap around her grief. The silence hummed with dangerous calm, and Eleanor finally slept. The town library smelled of paper and rain as Nathan guided Eleanor inside, his hand at her back. Nathan said, "Knowledge is the anchor of dignity." He opened estate documents, as if unspooling a map. Eleanor said, "It feels overwhelming, but you make it clearer." Nathan smiled, a quiet triumph hidden in kindness. Maya arrived late, eyes narrowing at the neat signatures on the table. Maya said, "Why does every form already look signed?" Nathan said, "Efficiency, nothing more." Eleanor said, "He just wants to help." Maya leaned closer and whispered, "Or control." Eleanor's pulse quickened, her heart torn between doubt and the comfort of Nathan's steady tone. In the bank lobby, polished floors reflected Eleanor's hesitant steps. Nathan said, "All we need is your authorization." He slid forms forward with deliberate grace. Eleanor said, "I want to believe this protects me." Nathan said, "It does." Maya whispered, "Don't sign without counsel." Eleanor said, "You think I'm blind." Maya said, I think you're hurting. Nathan softened his tone, filling the void. Nathan said, I promised your husband I'd carry this burden. Eleanor's pen hovered over the line, trembling as doubt fought grief. The banker looked away, silence an accomplice. At a downtown cafe, Nathan toasted with Eleanor, his glass raised like a seal on victory. Nathan said, every challenge is lighter shared. Eleanor said, I feel steadier with you near. Across the street, Maya watched through rain-smeared glass, her coffee untouched. Maya whispered to herself, he's weaving her tighter. Eleanor laughed softly at a story Nathan told, her grief temporarily suspended. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Nathan said, your future is safe in my hands. Eleanor's cheeks flushed, confusion and comfort tangled. The storm outside pressed against the windows like a warning unheeded. The study echoed with silence. As Eleanor opened a drawer Nathan had encouraged her to clear. Inside, she found empty envelopes where bonds once rested. She froze. Nathan entered behind her. Nathan said, I moved them for safekeeping. Eleanor said, without telling me. Nathan said, I wanted to spare you panic. Maya appeared at the door, voice sharp. Maya said, or you wanted to spare yourself the question. Eleanor's lips parted, torn between gratitude and suspicion. Nathan stepped closer, his presence heavy, his hand brushing her shoulder with practiced intimacy. At the courthouse steps, Eleanor clutched her coat against the wind, waiting for Nathan. He arrived late, adjusting his tie as though the world bent to his schedule. Nathan said, I've arranged everything. Eleanor said, why do I feel like I'm vanishing inside this? Nathan said, because grief consumes, and I know how to carry it. Maya approached, papers in hand. Maya said, don't sign anything today. Nathan's eyes flicked toward Maya with contained irritation. Eleanor's heart thudded, doubt seeping like water into cracks. She whispered, I trusted the wrong hands before. What if I'm doing it again? The rain had cleared, but Eleanor's heart carried its storm as she sat at the dining table. Maya spread files across the wood, her finger tapping a document stamped in red. Maya said, this signature isn't your husband's. Eleanor leaned closer, throat tight. Nathan entered, carrying a bottle of wine like an olive branch. Eleanor said, explain this. Nathan said, that's what grief does. Makes you see ghosts in ink. Maya snapped, forgery is not grief. The room seemed to shrink as Eleanor's trust cracked open. She whispered, you signed in his name. Nathan's smile thinned, his mask flickering for the first time. Eleanor stared at the forged document under the lamp's glow, her chest tightening. Nathan said, your husband asked me to prepare for the inevitable. Eleanor said, you forged his last wishes. Maya said, he exploited your grief before the soil dried. Nathan placed a hand over his heart, feigning hurt. Nathan said, everything I did was for you. Eleanor said, you wanted my inheritance. Maya's voice cut through like a blade. Maya said, and you nearly gave it to him. Nathan's eyes darkened, and his silence screamed louder than words. The storm within Eleanor erupted as she marched toward the study safe. Nathan followed, voice low. Nathan said, don't open it. Let me. Eleanor spun, fire in her eyes. Eleanor said, you think I can't see now? Maya kept pace, urging, check it yourself. Eleanor opened the safe, breath held tight, and found jewelry missing, bonds gone. She whispered, he hollowed me out. Nathan said, I moved them for protection. Maya said, you moved them for theft. Eleanor's tears blurred her vision, but clarity had finally arrived. Nathan's hand twitched, betraying the calm he wore like armor. In the silence that followed, Eleanor clutched the empty box to her chest. Nathan said, I only did what was necessary. Maya barked, necessary for who? Eleanor rose, trembling. Eleanor said, you stood at my husband's grave and stole his legacy. Nathan's eyes narrowed, mask gone. Nathan said, I gave you strength when you were drowning. Maya said. You tied the rope around her neck. Eleanor dropped the box, its echo like a gavel, sealing the truth. The confrontation ended in a silence so sharp it hurt. Eleanor said, You were never my savior. You were the thief holding my hand. Nathan stepped closer, voice colder. Nathan said, And you were too desperate to notice. Maya moved between them, protective. Maya said, It ends now. Nathan's gaze lingered on Eleanor, not with kindness but hunger exposed. Eleanor whispered, I let the wolf into my home. Nathan said, And the wolf will not leave easily. The room, heavy with betrayal, seemed to suffocate them all. Courthouse hallway buzzed with echoes, yet Eleanor heard only her pulse. Nathan stood at the end, folders tucked under his arm like weapons. Eleanor said, You forged, you stole, you lied. Nathan said, I saved you from drowning. Maya stepped forward, voice sharp. Maya said, You're about to drown yourself. Nathan's eyes glinted, cold and unrepentant. Eleanor said, You used my grief as your mask. Nathan whispered, And you wore it beautifully. The gavel sounded in a nearby chamber, but here the verdict was personal. The confrontation had no walls strong enough to contain it. Inside the courtroom, Eleanor sat at the table, grief and rage woven into her stare. Nathan leaned back, smiling as though justice were a stage. Nathan said, They'll never prove intent. Eleanor said, Intent bleeds through every word you spoke. Maya whispered, Stay strong. The judge entered, but Eleanor's war was not with robes or benches. It was with the man who held her trust like a blade. Nathan said, This is performance. I've already won. Eleanor replied, You'll never win what matters. My belief in you is gone. The silence cracked, and Nathan's smirk faltered. During recess, Eleanor confronted Nathan in the empty corridor. Eleanor said, How many widows before me? Nathan smirked. Nathan said, Enough to perfect the role. Maya stepped from the shadows, recorder in hand. Maya said, And now you've confessed. Nathan's eyes flashed, his composure cracked. Nathan said, You think anyone will believe you? Eleanor whispered, The truth doesn't need costumes. He advanced, but Maya stood firm, the recorder red light blinking like justice itself. Nathan's mask slipped, revealing the raw hunger beneath. Eleanor's fear transformed into steel. That night, Eleanor returned to the study, the storm outside echoing her turmoil. Nathan waited inside, uninvited, folder in hand. Nathan said, You can bury me or bury yourself. Eleanor said, I already buried one man I loved. I won't bury myself too. Maya stepped from behind, phone to ear. Maya said, Police are on their way. Nathan's mask shattered. He lunged, but Eleanor held firm, blocking the folder he thrust forward. Eleanor said, You don't get to script my life anymore. The thunder roared, as if the world delivered its verdict. The climax struck like lightning as officers stormed into the room. Nathan said, You'll regret betraying me. Eleanor said, You betrayed yourself. Maya said, It's over. Nathan fought against the cuffs, rage spilling unchecked. Eleanor stood in the wreckage of grief and theft, breath ragged but steady. For the first time, she no longer saw him as savior or thief, just a man stripped of illusion. Nathan's eyes locked on hers, hatred unmasked as the officers pulled him away. Eleanor whispered, You held me so I'd fall harder, but I'm still standing. Dawn thinned a storm to a hush, as Eleanor walked through the study and touched the dents their battle left in the wood. Maya brewed coffee that smelled like a truce with the world. Eleanor said, He's gone, but the damage sits in every drawer. Maya said, Then we count, we list, we take back. They opened folders and found gaps shaped like promises Nathan rehearsed. Eleanor said, I kept choosing comfort over questions. Maya said, You chose survival while a liar performed mercy. Eleanor texted the detective and felt her hands stop shaking. Eleanor said, I want the bonds traced and the accounts frozen. Maya said, I want his accomplices named. The house felt lighter, like air returning to a room starved of windows. Eleanor said, I thought grief made me smaller, but I can still widen. Maya said, widen and let consequence walk in with daylight. By mid-morning, they sat across from the assistant district attorney, who laid down a legal spine for their anger. Lena said, we have his transfers, his calls, and a recorded admission. Eleanor said, he hid behind paperwork and sympathy. Maya said, he had help. Lena nodded toward a banker's card clipped to a file. Lena said, the clerk ignored flags to keep a client happy. Eleanor pictured signatures sliding past sleepy eyes and felt heat rise. Eleanor said, silence turned greed into policy. Lena said, we'll charge the forgery, the theft, and the conspiracy. Maya said, and the silent partnership of a gatekeeper. Eleanor breathed and felt the shape of justice fit her ribs. Lena said, today we reclaim, and tomorrow we indict louder. At the bank, marble floors tried to make morality feel expensive, and Eleanor refused to be impressed. Harold waited with a tight tie and a looser conscience. Harold said, we followed internal guidelines. Maya said, your guidelines ducked the truth in plain sight. Eleanor said, you watched a widow sign while a predator smiled. Harold winced like a man seeing his reflection after a long lie. Harold said, we will cooperate fully and reverse what we can. Eleanor said, you will notify every widow you flagged and ignored. Maya said, and you will put policy in ink, not excuse. Harold rubbed his temple and finally nodded. Eleanor felt the room surrender its shine to something cleaner. Harold said, I will sign the alerts by noon. Eleanor said, sign it where people can read it. In the afternoon, Eleanor walked the cemetery path where kindness first put its hand on her shoulder and took something. Wind combed the grass like a mother making order of snarls. Eleanor said, I thought I needed a guardian to stand upright. Maya said, you needed time to learn your own spine again. Eleanor set a white rose and folded the ribbon with neat intention. Eleanor said, I will build something in his name that no thief can hold. Maya said, we'll draft a trust with locks that answer to truth. The air tasted like rain turned to clarity rather than weight. Eleanor said, grief is not a permission slip for anyone but me. Maya said, your permission writes the next chapter. The headstone did not answer, but silence finally felt like rest instead of absence. Evening returned them to the study where the storm first named the thief, and restoration began in ordinary motions. Eleanor said, we open a scholarship in his field, and we fund it with what we pry from the con. Maya said, we make his legacy louder than the theft ever was. Lena called to confirm charges were filed with a judge who disliked pageantry and loved receipts. Lena said, bail denied for now, given pattern and risk. Eleanor exhaled and felt the house settle around her like a home that chose her back. Eleanor said, I forgive myself for needing a voice that wasn't mine. Maya said, your voice is the one that ends this. Eleanor switched on the desk lamp and wrote the first line of the trust with a steady hand. Eleanor said, he taught me how to test every lock, and I kept the key. Morning painted the courthouse steps in a thin gold that felt like a promise, and Eleanor climbed them with a steadiness she had not owned in months. Maya said, today is not the end, but it ends his whole. Eleanor said, I want the truth read aloud. Reporters clustered like gulls around a trawler, and microphones rose, hungry for record. Nathan was brought from holding, and he looked smaller without his curated suit of safety. Eleanor said, he taught me how lies dress as mercy. Maya said, and how mercy fights back with receipts. Inside, the hum softened as a clerk whispered case numbers to the judge. Eleanor held her breath as if surfacing after a long dive through iron water. Nathan stared at her with the quiet hatred of a magician whose trapdoor jammed. Eleanor said, I will not be the scenery of his story. Maya said, Then take the stage and speak in facts. Inside the courtroom, the air felt dialed to a frequency that hummed on bone, and Eleanor sat where the truth would cross the room. The judge said, "We proceed on the record." The prosecutor read each count like nails finding wood, and Nathan's face held that thin smile he wore when a mirror was near. Eleanor said, "He stood by a casket and measured what I could not carry." Maya said, "He called theft protection and named it devotion." The judge asked for impact, and Eleanor stood with the stillness of someone who now believed her own spine. Eleanor said, "He stole hours I could have used to grieve with honesty." She added, "He taught me to audit kindness and to price my boundaries." Nathan said, "She needed guidance," and the words sounded like moths hitting glass. The judge said, "Needs do not excuse fraud," and the gavel's tap felt like a lid at last. At recess, Eleanor and Maya stepped into a side corridor where the day's noise thinned to the truth of shoes on tile. Harold approached with an envelope that sagged like a conscience late to work. Harold said, "Our review found a silent authorization path, and I signed it." Eleanor said, "Your ink was a door he used." Harold said, "We are terminating the policy and funding repayments." Maya said, "You will fund penance, not just refunds." Harold looked at the floor and nodded as if gravity had opinions. Eleanor said, "You will publish the warning in the window where widows wait in line." Harold said, "We will, and I will sign my own name beneath it." Maya said, "Then make the font large enough to be read through tears." The corridor felt wider, as if a locked hallway had finally remembered it was a road. Afternoon turned the courthouse windows into mirrors, and Eleanor caught her reflection stitched to the day's pages. The judge returned, and the room leaned forward like a ship in shared weather. The prosecutor said, "Pattern, planning, and predation," and the words arranged the past into a map without exits. Nathan's attorney asked for lenience, and the plea sounded like a salesman describing smoke. Eleanor said, "He did not stumble into my life, he charted it like a harvest." Maya said, "He watered trust and harvested silence." The judge said, "Sentence will reflect harm and deceit." Nathan stared ahead, as if a stage light could still be found, but the room had traded curtains for glass. Eleanor felt no triumph, only a clean ache that did not need translation. The gavel rose, and the air held its breath like a choir about to sing. Evening found Eleanor back in the study, where the storm once shouted the scam's name, and the house now breathed like a chest, no longer braced for a blow. Maya set a thin box on the desk that the detective had released from evidence. Maya said, "It is the last folder he carried the night he lunged." Eleanor opened it and found a postcard of the cemetery, the sky too blue to be kind. On the back was a single line, and Nathan's hand was careful as ever. Nathan had written, "The first key is never the only key." Maya said, "He wants you haunted by maybes." Eleanor said, "He wants to turn final pages into riddles." She stood, carried the postcard to the shredder, and fed it through like a name she no longer needed. Eleanor said, "He can keep his echoes. I will keep the doors I lock." Maya smiled, tired and bright, and said, "Final enough for tonight." The house answered with quiet that did not negotiate.